Life Stories Live.
Welcome to Life Stories Worldwide. We're coming from the United States today, and we have a special guest speaker with us this morning that's going to be sharing his story. His name is Wendell Nordby. He lives in Northern California. He's a businessman, contractor, many years in that industry, but he's also very special to me. Wendell has been a mentor and a friend of mine, and I know that he's got a tremendous story that could help a lot of you out there. Take a moment and listen in. Wendell, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, out there and all over the place. I've been in some of those locations, Russia and Asia and all around the place. Right now, I'm here in what's called Santa Rosa, California, about 50 miles north of San Francisco, where I was brought up, raised as a youngster. A little bit about my story might impact your thinking and get you to be thinking about something other than all the problems you have. You know, I'm in another month, I'm going to be 80. Okay. And it seems like I maybe could be about 50. Life has gone by so quick and so good that it's hard to contain all the great things that God's doing here on this place. But I'm anxious to know what it's going to be like in the next step, the next phase of life, walking with Jesus. You know, I never, as a young fella, I grew up in San Francisco, okay, with a pretty middle-class family, lived in a flat in the middle of family above us, family below us, and raised, just a normal life, what I thought. But all around me was a bunch of craziness. My parents were alcoholics. Later on, my brothers went in different directions, and it just seemed kind of a crazy lifestyle, right? So anyway, I grew up in this little place down there in San Francisco, out in what's called the Sunset District, and didn't know much, didn't care much for school. Went to school, but it really wasn't my favorite subject. We had a classroom. I remember looking out over the ocean, and I always wanted to be out there, not inside the class. So I was not what you call the studious type. Later on, I began to know how to read. So now you can see behind me, I do a lot of reading, and I enjoy that. But okay, so I'm growing up in this place, and I met a gal. I was about I've been about 19 when I met her in a pub. You would call it a pub if you were in Scotland. It was a beer hub up here in San Mateo County. Anyway, I was feeling my oats, and so we got to get to talking a little bit. Met the next day, and the next thing you know, it's kind of turned into a permanent relationship, and we got married. In fact, I had to get my mother's to sign the birth certificate, not the birth, I mean the certificate that how old I was, because I wasn't quite 21, and you had to be 21 to get married at that time in the United States. I don't know what age it is now. A lot of you folks aren't even getting married, so it doesn't seem to matter. Anyway, we got married and led what I call a pretty decent life. I was a carpenter in San Francisco on high-rise construction and that, and spent quite a few years at that. And what I thought was the normal life, and my wife, she was a Catholic girl, and she had everything to do in our family about religion, as far as I knew what that was all about. So she took care of that. She went to school went to church on Sundays. I watched football and drank and had a good time, but I felt comfortable in her taking care of all of that. So anyway, we go on for a few years, and we decide to move up to up north of town, up to where I live now, up near Santa Rosa. And I commuted then to San Francisco, stayed working for the same company I think I ended up working for about 17 years. And she, while I was at work, she got involved with a Catholic Bible study. And there was a priest there who showed up in their parish, if you will call it that, and started a Bible study with about 10 women. And they met during the week. and they started talking about a relationship with Jesus. Okay, so they introduced this guy. He introduced these gals to a personal relationship with Jesus. In other words, took them off the cross and it got in their heart. So I'm working and I'm listening. She's trying to tell me a little bit about things, and I'm sort of listening, but not really. You know, that's her thing. You know, my thing is to just produce the money for the food and enjoyment, and you know, it's kind of the working guy. Still am actually. Anyway, she kept kind of on it a little bit, and I felt like, here's how I felt. I don't know, some of you guys maybe felt something like this, but I felt like she was hanging out with another guy. I thought that she had got involved with someone else, and you know, I always said, you know, I think she fell in love with someone else, but later on I fell in love with the same guy. So I'm going through this process in my mind, and she's talking about this. And I got a neighbor guy up here in Santa Rosa at the time. He was what's called a Jehovah's Witness. Okay, no, I'm sorry, he was a Mormon. Jehovah's Witness was another guy. He was a Mormon. Okay, I didn't understand the difference between Mormon, evangelical, Catholic. I didn't get all that. Anyway, all I knew was it was different. So he's trying to convince me to become a Mormon. Okay. And she's talking to me. She's in a struggle talking to me about this relationship with Jesus, not the church, just me and this guy, Jesus. And I'm going, you know, this is getting really difficult. Then, so we went up there. We decided to build ourselves a house, and we're building a house. And my neighbor, we bought the property from my neighbor, about 3.5 acres. He had 15 acres. He split it up, and so he was a carpenter. And so I took 6 weeks off.
Life Stories.
For my job to put this house up and get it weatherized. And he was next door, and it turned out he's a carpenter. So I asked him if he would come to work for me, and he did. And so it turns out he's a Christian, which I didn't know what that meant at the time, but he was one of these guys, you know, that was different and had a different kind of thinking about things. And I remember one day we're up on a roof and we're nailing down the sheeting, and he hits his thumb. And I mean, it was a nasty looking thing. I thought it would have to come off. And he hits his thumb. He goes, slush. And I looked at him and I said, I don't even know that word. I know another word when I hit my thumb and my hand's about to come off, and it wasn't pretty, you know. And so it was different. And the guy was different. He was very generous with his time, very sympathetic with me, and yet he didn't share the same language that I shared and grew up in the construction industry using almost a foreign language to a church guy, and yet he wasn't offended. He just kind of worked alongside me and everything. In fact, later on, I'd run out of money for labor. I only had enough money for the materials to finish the house. And I said, I can't use you anymore. I have to do the rest all by myself. And he said, no, I'll just show up. So he just showed up and worked for nothing for a couple of weeks. And is that kind of guy without saying I had to do anything for it or anything like that. So I'm having all this happen. And next thing you know, I'm opening up. In fact, the matter was I got a Playboy subscription, right? So I opened up the Playboy, and inside is what's now called or used to, now not today, they don't do it this way, used to be called a tract, with a little packet there with a story about how you could give your life to Jesus if you were having trouble. And I'm looking, my wife just keeps putting this stuff in me. And I'm going, oh, this is getting a little bit disturbing. So then the one big thing that happened that kind of really tweaked me was, we're driving home one night. I was taking the bus to San Francisco. It's about an hour and a half drive. And then she would pick me up down in the little town called Sebastopol. And we lived out in the country. So we drive about 10 minutes back up to the house. So she'd pick me up. I'd get in there about 7 o'clock at night, and she'd pick me up. And we're going back home up the hill. And I did turn down there was still a little light at night. And I turned down the visor of the car because I'm on the passenger side, right? And I look at the visor and it says, in case of rapture, driver may disappear. Oh, holy cow, what the heck is going on? This is my car, right? No, apparently not. So she kind of looks over at me and wanted to see my reaction. And it was kind of weird, but I say, okay, she loves me. The thing about her relationship with this group and this church and this guy, Jesus, was she loved me more than when we first got married. Usually it kind of goes the other way, you kind of slip a little bit, but no, she got, I couldn't do anything wrong. Even though I wasn't thinking like her and wasn't following her or anything, I couldn't do anything wrong. She just did everything I asked her to do and loved me. And it was like, wow, this is bizarre. So I couldn't get mad. So another time we're driving home. This time I got in the front of the car and driving, and I get in the car and I close the door, and I threw down a pack of cigarettes on the dashboard. Now, cigarettes was interesting with me. I had reached a point, I was doing about 3.5, 4 packs a day. Imagine that. I don't know how many, I forget how many cigarettes in a pack, 20 or something. I don't know, a lot of them. So anyway, in fact, I had now become the foreman, actually the superintendent on the projects we were doing in San Francisco. And if you asked me a question and I didn't have a cigarette in my hand, I had to light the cigarette. It was kind of like, I couldn't do much without a cigarette. Kind of a weird thing. I don't know how some of you folks feel. I know some of you that spend a little time in the bottle, that's kind of the way it is. I mean, you have to have that crutch to kind of hang on to. So I didn't realize at the time what it was, but there it was. Anyway, I get in the car that night and I threw the cigarettes on the dashboard and I said, that's it. And I turned, I looked at Nancy and I said, who said that? I had no idea what the heck was going on. It was incredible. And you know what? I never had a desire or ever touched a cigarette again. And I've been smoking since I was 12, and I was 33 then. Yeah, think about that. I was out of control. And now just to say I'm getting a little nervous about things. So a little while later, now I'm thinking about this guy they're talking about, but I don't understand anything about him. So a little while later, she says to me, because I figure, what am I going to get her for her birthday, man? So she says, well, if you get me a seat, take me to this meeting, it won't cost you anything, and that'd be my birthday present. Oh, we're okay. And then the neighbor boy and his wife, they're going to go too. So, okay, I won't feel too nervous. And I don't smoke anymore, so I don't have to get up and get out. Like I couldn't sit in a place very long without lighting up, and you can't do that in one of these church things. So we go over to this big old church building, and there's about 1,500 people in this place, and they got me in a pew, comfortable pew, and they were on one side, my wife on the other, and this guy gets up and starts to tell his story. I believe his name was Hal Lindsey. He ended up writing a book called The Late Great Planet Earth. So he's some preacher boy down from Los Angeles working the beaches. And anyway, this guy comes out on the stage. He's got this, really sharp looking suit. He's got a lot of hair. He's just, he looks like a showboat to me, because I'm a carpenter boy, man. I ain't into all this fancy stuff. So I'm kind of trying to ignore him. I'm just being there because my wife wants me there. And then he tells all this story about this guy, Jesus, what he did in his life, like he's a real guy.
Life Stories Live.
Not just some image you go to and like pray for some calf or something like that. I mean, this guy he's talking about like he knows him real. So when he gets down to the end, he asks a question. He says, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm hearing some of this. Well, let me back up a second, because during this conversation, even though I'm listening half in, half out, I start to realize what he's telling me is that my wife and my 3 boys are going to heaven, and I'm going to hell. I ain't going to make it. And he's got my attention a little bit, but I don't know that, but I'm thinking that's what he's saying. So we get down to the deal where he says to me, but he's saying it to everybody, but you seem to be looking right at me, and I'm listening. And he says, listen, why don't you try it? If you follow this little prayer after me, then we'll see, you can see what God could do in your life. So I said, oh, you know what? Okay, try something. Look at what it's done for my wife. My kids are happy. Everybody's happy, but I'm confused. So he says to, it was real simple. He said, first of all, we confess we're a sinner. I'm a sinner. And I thought, a sinner? Let's see. I love America, John Wayne. I'm in the United States. I'm not a sinner. A sinner is somebody that's out there in another country and causing trouble. But I did it anyway. And you know what? The minute I confessed, I said, okay, I'm a sinner. It's like my mind, it just all of a sudden the screen came up, and I saw nothing but bad stuff, darkness and bad stuff, and going in a horrible direction. It was just revealed to me in a second. And I'm thinking one thing, 1 minute, and the next minute, now I'm focused. I'm in trouble. And he says, then ask Jesus to come into your life and clean it up. And so I did that. And my mind, I don't know how to say it, it's a miracle to me, and it will be to you or to anyone else that this thing happens to. My mind went from thinking certain thoughts to now only thinking about others. That's a name that's kind of gotten in my head even more so in the last couple of years. All of a sudden, I was thinking about someone else, lots of people, not me. I was asking God to forgive me for my bad sins, for my bad behavior, for my selfishness, for all the things that I thought I was supposed to be looking for, all of a sudden didn't matter. My mind was changed in an instant. Unbelievable. I mean, how can that happen? They got people working now, psychiatrists that spend hours and hours and hours and people, counselors, and trying to help people get their life straight in an instant without any really effort on my part other than surrendering. I surrendered in a moment's time, and in a moment's time, I was now somebody else. I know some of you are going to find that really difficult to believe, but it's the truth. It's what happened. It's incredible. And all of a sudden, I started thirsting after the Bible. My wife they used a little book, what they called The Good News for Modern Man. This was a very simple New Testament book and in language that was probably third grade, easy to understand. And I devoured it. And then I went into another book, and I read the book that the Bible, American Standard, that Hal Lindsey had talked about his using. Anyway, I just on and on and on. And there's a thirst that happens after something that feeds you. This was feeding me. It was all of a sudden I wasn't hungry for liquor or booze, or it's a whole different person. And here I'm 33 years old, and I'm going, this is bizarre. And it was a funny thing on the job site. So I'm the superintendent. I think we were doing about a 22-story building at the time, and a lot of guys around and contractors and stuff, and they would like to spend time, lunchtime with someone of my quote stature at the time. And I always had a Bible with me now. I mean, I'm the guy. I'm the only guy that had a Bible in a project, and there's probably a couple of hundred guys. So one particular guy really interests me. He was an electrician foreman, and we were always talking all the time. But all of a sudden now he came up to me, and he'd get about 2 or 3 feet in front of me, and he couldn't come any closer. And he said, "I don't know what it is," he said, but I can't get any closer to you. I'm understanding that this time I'm starting to see how the Holy Spirit works. And I'm going, we got some issues here with some different powers going on, dynamic and Jesus. It was kind of bizarre. And then I noticed too that my little lunch crowd I used to have in there all the time talking about different things, sex and women they're going to meet in the bar crowd and all that. All of a sudden, they're not showing up anymore. They're kind of distancing themselves. Some came close, but most of them, 99% of them, shied away from me in that free time. They didn't want to communicate. They were nervous. So I'm watching that impact on the thing. We got involved with my wife took me to what was called at that time as the Full Gospel Businessmen's meeting in Santa Rosa. And so this was interesting. For my birthday, I took her to this meeting, and I got changed. And then she for my birthday, she took me to this dinner thing where the guys would get up and talk about Jesus, and then they would sing and all this kind of stuff. And I'd sing, and I never quite have the voice for that, or even understanding of singing. But she took me there, and I met these guys, and they were all kinds of guys in different lines of business. And
Life Stories Live.